Hello, and welcome to another edition of the podcast that I, your host, David Woodruff, affectionately label the Woodruff Report. We've got an action-packed podcast coming at you, mostly focusing on the big event this time of year, March Madness. If you will recall back to last show, we gave you a little March Madness preview, and on this week's podcast, we're going to talk about what has happened in the magical competition so far. Besides college basketball, I'm going to weigh in on the debate that seems to be raging in the National Basketball Association currently. Should players rest, or what's the deal with all these resting players? We've had opinions from basically all the stars in the league. Coaches have weighed in on the argument. Is it okay to rest your players, or should the best players always be playing because their job is to entertain the folks who watch on TV and the folks who come to the arena? So, here at Woodruff Studios, we will weigh in on that debate. So, we've got a fun, action-filled podcast coming straight at you. Again, I'm your host, David Woodruff. Let's talk some sports, starting in 3, 2, 1. Day one of March Madness certainly did not disappoint from a fan's point of view. I was so excited for this first day. You've got games going willy-nilly. I had my tablet up, computer screens all around me. Me and my friends were watching all the games simultaneously, trying to take in all the college basketball that we can at this magical time of the year. What a first day it was. This was not the upset-laden first day that we've seen. In fact, the first round wasn't as upset-filled as it has been in recent years, but the quality and tier of basketball being played was amazing, and from top to bottom, all these teams were very competitive. There were very few games where a team ran away with it or led the entire game, or the fans from either team didn't think at least at some point in the game their team could have won. So there were a ton of games going on, so I can't really give you all the summaries of all the games that happened, but I can give you some highlights. And let's start with one of the best stories of this 2017 March Madness, which is Northwestern, making their first NCAA tournament appearance ever after putting together quite a good record in the Big Ten and doing well in the tournament. And they actually beat Vanderbilt in their first round game. So first tournament for the Wildcats and first tournament win after they outlasted 9-seed Vanderbilt in a great game. It was a very strange game because with Vanderbilt seemingly tied, one of their players fouled a Northwestern player for seemingly no reason, which eventually gave Northwestern the points that would eventually win them the game. So a lack of awareness on the part of that Vanderbilt player sort of gifted Northwestern this tournament win. And I hesitate to say he gifted because Northwestern had played hard. They'd played well for the first half and 99% of the second half, but a sad way for Vanderbilt's season to end. In other news, 12-seed Middle Tennessee State scalped another major team as they took down 5-seed Minnesota. If you'll remember from last year, Middle Tennessee State were the Minnows who took down Michigan State in one of the greatest upsets in NCAA March Madness history. Michigan State, one of the tournament favorites led by Denzel Valentine, currently plying his trade on the Chicago Bulls. Great athletic team, senior-laden with leadership, and they lost to this Middle Tennessee State, who returned a bunch of the players and beat Minnesota. To be somewhat fair, Minnesota was not realistically a 5-seed. Some data systems projected or looked at them and rated them as more of a 9 or 10 seed. So a pretty weak 5-seed Minnesota who wasn't playing great basketball down the stretch, but still great win for this Middle Tennessee State program. Sticking with the upsets, one that we called here on the Woodruff Report. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We love our fans. And remember, if you listen to this podcast, we give you some great information about upsets you can pick. USC took down SMU in a thrilling contest that came down to the wire. The Trojans outlasted SMU and eventually won by 1 point after SMU flailed up a floater at the buzzer, which hit off front iron and bounced away. As a Trojan fan, I was going insane. I was ecstatic because not many people thought we could do it. SMU was kind of a dark horse pick in this year's tournament, and we'd beaten them earlier this season, and we did it again. So congratulations to the Trojans, who would eventually be knocked out in a thrilling contest the next round by Baylor, another wire-to-wire contest that Baylor eventually outlasted. Baylor has a very good team. They're very deep. They have a lot of good players. Other upsets from the first set of games in this March Madness 2017 were Wichita State beating Dayton. Wichita State was a powerful 10 seed, and Dayton was a bit of a weak 7 seed. So many people had projected this result, but still an upset there. Xavier has been the Cinderella story and the real bracket buster so far in this year's tournament, as they took down another dark horse contender. And I have to admit, I really like this Maryland team led by Melo Trimble, and was disappointed to see them knocked out in the first round. That really was the first nail in the eventual death. That was the first nail in the coffin of my bracket, which is now obliterated and cast into a million pieces with South Carolina beating Duke, Villanova losing. I mean, make no mistake, just because there weren't a lot of upsets on day one doesn't mean that this has been like a tournament where the favorite has won every game. I mean, you saw Wisconsin, led by Koenig, take down number 1 seed and last year's champion Villanova in the second round in a great contest. I mean, Villanova-Wisconsin occurring in the second round is crazy. Many people thought Wisconsin was sort of a underseeded 8 seed. They could have been much higher, and they proved it, beating one of the tournament favorites. Duke lost to South Carolina. South Carolina had not been playing good basketball coming into the NCAA tournament, but they have turned it up a notch completely, winning their first round game against Marquette and then scalping Krzyzewski and company behind great play from Sindarius Thornwell. He's the man that makes it all move for the Gamecocks. So other highlights from day one, I think the best game of the first round was Michigan versus Oklahoma State. What a game. Shots going in everywhere, both high-powered offenses, seniors and talented teams going at it on the biggest stage, and a wire-to-wire thrilling contest which Michigan eventually won by 1 point. It looked to be sort of over with 45 to 30 seconds left in the game, but free throw woes and made shots by Oklahoma State, the Cowboys, made it interesting at the end. What a game. 92-91. The Wolverines outlasted the Cowboys in the best game of day one. And during the next round, Michigan would go on to beat 2-seed Louisville. So Michigan is playing tremendous basketball at the moment, led by senior point guard Walton. He can knock down shots from everywhere. You've got DJ Durkin, talented sophomore, big man. And that's a team that when they make shots, similar to like USC, they would just start heating up and they couldn't miss. Michigan is similar to that, and they start making shots and you're like, wow, this is this is not what we bargained for. This is a very, very, very good team. So, with all that, those are kind of the highlights of week one. Who is left in the Sweet 16? I'm sorry, not the Sweet 16. Who is left in the Elite 8? There are some games going on. I'm recording this at about 7 o'clock on Friday, and so there are some great games still to go, such as UCLA versus Kentucky. That's going to be an absolutely, it might be the game of the tournament, and we're not even in the Final Four yet. Lonzo Ball, Malik Monk, first-rounders on both teams, and two prestigious programs that have combined for 15-plus NCAA championships. If you want a prediction, I'm not sure if you want to, I do have KU, Kentucky University, going on and beating this UCLA team, just because I think their talent is overwhelming, and they've been here before. They've got star players. They've got a good coach in Calipari, and I think UCLA is very reliant on a few players, and if they go cold or if something happens, if they get in foul trouble, UCLA will not be able to compete with such a talented team. But this game is going to be one of the games of the tournament, as I stated previously, and that game's still to go. Also, Wisconsin plays Florida in another game between two teams that many people didn't expect to make it this far, and Baylor is playing South Carolina as I speak. Currently, South Carolina is up in that game, but I'm just going to go on as though I do not know the final score of that game. So who has punched their ticket to the next round? Well, starting with the team that I think is going to go all the way, Kansas absolutely throttled Purdue, and they're playing some of their best basketball at the moment. Josh Jackson, Devontae Graham. It just seems like these guys can't miss sometimes. And they're athletic, they're good, they're disciplined, they're talented, but still have some senior leadership on the team. And right now, I can't see anybody beating them. They absolutely throttled a good team in Purdue. Oregon is meeting Kansas in the next round, trying to beat Rock Chalk Jayhawk after their 1-point victory over Michigan in another one of the games of the tournament, which came wire to wire down to the final shot, which ultimately did not go down for the Wolverines, breaking the hearts of their seniors. But a magical run from the Wolverines, and they are definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten next year. In other news, Xavier, as I stated before, the Cinderella story of the tournament with an incredible win over 2-seed Arizona. Arizona was another trendy pick to win the national title. Xavier, undersized, not the most talented, an 11 seed coming into the tournament, faltering, not playing their best basketball, but absolutely putting up performance after performance in this tournament, and they are moving on to the Elite Eight to face Gonzaga, the number 1 seed with question marks swirling around, the AP poll number 1 team. But was their schedule too easy? They didn't really play any good competition. These are all things that experts were asking going into the tournament, and Gonzaga has shown that they are a legit team after outlasting a very, very good West Virginia team who I had said was a dark horse candidate to make it to the Final Four on this podcast last week. They beat my Mountaineers. Not a huge fan of the Mountaineers, but I was sort of rooting for them because I'd picked them. They were one of my upset picks, one of my bracket buster picks, and I was a little disappointed when they didn't win. But even as a 4 seed, West Virginia might have been a little underseeded, and Gonzaga took care of them in a thrilling game, very typical of this year's March Madness, another close game. On the other side of the bracket, North Carolina punched their ticket earlier today with a win over Butler. So we've got 5 of the 8 who are going to be in the Elite Eight have already made it. And if we learn one thing from what the tournament has taught us so far, we know that these games are going to be great. They're going to be wire to wire. The teams are going to be ultra competitive with one another. And the only team that I really have seen so far that just looks better than everybody else is Kansas. Kansas looks, unstoppable at the moment, but you never know. The NCAA tournament is always a lottery. You never know who's going to come through. They could have an off game, foul trouble. A million things could happen, and that's why there's no sure pick to ever win an NCAA tournament. So that's my NCAA tournament update. I'm sorry that I had to record this before some of the games happened, but your Elite Eight should be set by tonight. If you just want to do a quick check, look up March Madness bracket 2017, you'll get the updated bracket, and you'll have your Elite 8 teams set, and there are going to be a lot of intriguing matchups going in. I really like this Xavier team. Are they the Cinderella team, the 11 seed that makes it to the Final Four? There are very few teams that have ever done that. What's up with Kansas is North Carolina. I'm going to get back to the national title game, and then this UCLA-Kentucky game, those are the storylines that I see being the most interesting going forward. So let's stick with basketball, but move to the NBA. And a recent sort of topic that has been debated a lot has been the question of resting players. Popularized by Greg Popovich, who'd often rest his big three players, even in games that were primetime ticket games. Just recently, Steve Kerr and Popovich both rested a bunch of players in the Spurs-Warriors game that was supposed to be a huge big-ticket meeting between the best two teams in the West, turned into kind of a D-League game. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it was mostly reserves playing in the game. But should players be allowed to rest, or do coaches have a mandate to put their best players out on the floor at all times because that's what the fans pay to see, that's what the fans want to see when they turn on the TV, when they come to the arena wearing the jersey of the star player? They don't want to see that player sit. And although I do sympathize with the fans, because if I was a Spurs or Warriors fan who was looking forward to the Spurs-Warriors game, I would have been disappointed with the starting lineups and who was on the court in the game. I completely understand where you're coming from, but I got to side with the coaches on this one. This is their decision. It's their team. And although fans should have a major say in how the team works, all that, it's really a coach's decision because they know best. They know if a player is just physically exhausted and is at a higher risk of injury. They consult with the trainers who might see that a player's he's wearing down physically. They just have more information than we do as fans. So it's the coach's decision. And I would be mad if a player continually rests star players, but you just got to understand their perspective. Some of these big favorite teams with a bunch of star players like the Golden State Warriors, Spurs, Cavs, they've already clinched playoffs, and so their regular season is basically a tune-up for the playoffs where the real grind starts and you have to put 100% effort every day, every second on the court because you never know when you're going to have to go home, et cetera, et cetera. That all starts in the playoffs. So the regular season is not as important as the playoffs, obviously, and thus coaches should be free to rest their players when they want to. And there have been a lot of players like James Harden, Russell Westbrook saying, I'm just here to hoop. I'm not worried about rest. I'll rest when the season ends. But I think this is a sort of naive viewpoint, and they know better. They're just kind of saying this because it's their job as athletes. They want to please the fans because a lot of fans don't want their players to be like, yeah, I like resting every fifth day. That's seen as weak or soft, or that's not how they used to do it. I mean, just look at baseball. Back in the days, pitchers used to pitch like every 3 days, and they'd pitch 12 innings each, and that's just not healthy, especially with how the game is accelerated and how much talent and how fast it moves and the freak athleticism on display every night. So I just thought I'd weigh in on that debate a little bit. Here at Woodruff Report Studios, we side with the coaches, but we do sympathize with the fans. We hear your argument, and it's a tough decision, but coach knows best, trainers know best, organization knows best, and that's who you gotta listen to when the final bell rings. So thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Woodruff Report. I am your host, David Woodruff. On this podcast, we recapped and gave an update of March Madness 2017, what a tournament it's been, ultra competitive, wire-to-wire games, and Not a ton of blowouts, and especially now that we're narrowing it down to 8 teams, these games are going to be competitive. You're going to get to see top-tier talent. You're going to get to see first-round picks galore, et cetera, et cetera. Then we weighed in on the whole resting players in the NBA, which has been sweeping the nation. That debate, we gave our take and decided that the organizations and the coach know best. So please join us next week. We'll probably provide you with another March Madness update. Anyway, again, this has been the Woodruff Report. I'm your host, David Woodruff. Thank you for listening. See you guys next week.